All right, let's get right into it. Have you ever felt like you need to be some kind of detective just to figure out the prices at your local grocery store? Well, today, we're going undercover to unpack the hidden story that's hiding behind those price tags. You know the feeling, right? You head to the supermarket, grab your usual stuff, and when you get to the checkout, the total just keeps creeping up, week after week. But why is that really?
Now, the easy answer, the one we always hear, is inflation, or maybe fuel costs, or supply chain problems. And look, those things are definitely part of the picture, but they are just the tip of the iceberg. The real story, the one that's almost completely invisible to us, is playing out right there on the supermarket shelves.
Okay, so let's dig in. When a small company wants to get its product into a big supermarket chain, they're not just selling their item. No, they're basically renting a tiny, super expensive piece of commercial real estate. And that rent, well, it comes with a very, very long list of fees. Just look at this list. It's not just one cost. It's like death by a thousand cuts. First, you've got to pay a listing fee just to get your foot in the door. Then there are fees for the warehouse, extra fees if your product needs to stay cold, distribution fees, and you even have to pay into the store's marketing fund. The list just goes on and on. On their own, maybe one or two seem okay, but when you stack them all up, they build this massive financial wall. So this is how that price you pay actually gets built. Let's say price X is what it costs to actually make the product. Then you have to pile on price Y. That's all those fees we just talked about. And finally, the retailer adds their own profit margin, price Z. What you see on the shelf is all of that added together. Every single layer just pushes that final price higher and higher. But honestly, the fees are only half the story. The real kicker here is who carries all the risk. And I think you're going to be surprised to find out that pretty much all of that burden falls on the smallest player in this whole game. And it's all because of something called the consignment model. Now, MSME just stands for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise, your local startup brands. In this model, the huge retailer doesn't actually buy the products from the small business. Nope. They just offer up some shelf space. The small company still owns every single one of its items sitting on that shelf, right up until the moment you put it in your cart. And this really shows you just how lopsided the whole thing is. The retailer, they provide the space. The small business, well, they own all the stock. They have to eat the cost if anything expires or gets damaged. And this is the big one. They are basically acting as a bank for the retailer by waiting forever to get paid. Seriously, let this number sink in. 60 to 90 days. Can you imagine going to your job every single day, paying for your own transportation, your own lunch, everything, but you don't get a paycheck for 2 or even 3 months? That is the reality for these small businesses. They have to pay for all their ingredients and their staff right away, and then just wait. It creates this absolutely crushing pressure on their cash flow. So what happens when you combine all these fees with all this risk? Well, you get a system where success isn't really about having the best product anymore. It's about having the deepest pockets. And as you're about to see, that creates a ridiculously uneven playing field. This visual right here says it all. Think about a single fixed marketing fee. For some giant multinational corporation, that fee is just a tiny sliver of their revenue. It's nothing, just a standard cost of doing business. But for a small local business, that exact same fee could be a massive, crippling chunk of their entire revenue, literally threatening their ability to keep the lights on. And the source material we looked into for this really just crystallizes the whole issue with this quote. It says, competition quietly shifts from being about product quality and innovation to being about financial endurance. In other words, the winner isn't necessarily the brand with the best tasting chips or the most creative new drink. The winner is the brand that has enough cash in the bank to survive the high costs and the long wait to get paid. And this brings us back to something I bet you've experienced. You find a great new local product, you fall in love with it, you tell your friends, and then a few months later, it's just gone. Poof, vanished from the shelf. It's not always because it wasn't selling. It's often because of what's called a quiet exit. So here's what that journey actually looks like for so many of these brands. Step 1, they fight like crazy just to get a spot on the shelf. Step 2, they start absorbing that endless stream of costs and the agony of waiting months for their money. Step 3, the burnout phase. They realize they're burning through cash way faster than it's coming in, and that leads to step 4, the strategic withdrawal. They quietly pull their own product, not because it was a failure, but to save their entire company from going bankrupt. And that's the most important point here.
I really want this to land. These businesses aren't failing in the traditional sense. They are making a smart, calculated business decision to retreat from a totally unsustainable situation so that they can live to fight another day.
Okay, so a small brand disappears from the shelf. Why should you and I care? Because when these small, innovative companies are forced to back away, it sends a ripple effect across the entire market, and it affects all of us. So what does that ripple effect look like? Well, for us, it means less choice. The shelves start to look like an echo chamber, just filled with products from the same few mega brands. We lose out on all the amazing creativity and innovation that these smaller producers bring to the table. The market itself gets less competitive. And, really importantly, our local economies lose out on the jobs and the growth that these businesses could have created. And what this all creates is an illusion. We walk into a gigantic supermarket, we see thousands of products lining the aisles, and we think, wow, look at all this choice. But the truth is, over time, the system is designed in a way that ensures we actually have fewer real independent alternatives to choose from.
So the next time you're pushing a cart down the aisle, just take a closer look at the shelf. That little price tag isn't just telling you how much something costs. It's telling a much bigger story. A story of access, of risk, and of survival. What story will you see?